Welcome back to the video lecture on ASEAN step practice in the domestic implementation of international law. This time, we are going to discuss matter of the trade and investment. This section considers trend among ASEAN states in the domestic implementation of international economic law, including trade and investment law. Domestic implementation of trade and investment law operate differently from the domestic implementation of other areas of international law, such as the law of the sea or international human rights law. In the main, international trade law comprises the state's compliance with obligation under the World Trade Organization system and its dispute settlement body's decision. International investment law is implemented domestically when state parties faithfully carry out their obligation under bilateral investment treaties, so-called the BITs, and free trade agreements, in short, FTAs, and multilateral regional investment protection agreement. In the field of state dispute settlements, in short, ISDS, ASEAN states' approaches toward international trade disputes are generally uniform and consistent under the WTO dispute settlement system, even though several Asian states have been openly critical of the bias in the current ISDS structure, its predecessor, and its process and outcomes. However, there is a greater variety in state practice in international investment law. We begin by considering the extent to which ASEAN states have signed and ratified the ICSID Convention. As the convention provides the ICSID, for example, the ISDS mechanism for the enforcement of the ASEAN states' domestic implementation of their investment treaty obligations, this may provide an indication of ASEAN state approach to ISDS. Annex A shows the extent of accession and ratification. No pattern of practice among ASEAN states in the domestic implementation of international economic law may, however, be observed. There is no observable significant practice or trend in the treaty provisions of ASEAN states. The first, unlike the WTO system, there is no single multilateral investment treaty to which all ASEAN states are signatories. ASEAN states are signatories to various multilateral treaties, such as the ASEAN treaties, which have been observed to provide fewer binding provisions and different regulatory standards than the comprehensive and progressive agreements for Trans-Pacific, like Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan are parties to the Energy Charter Treaty in 1994. No other Asian state has signed the ECT. The second, there exists a wide variety of treaty provisions within each ASEAN state. For example, China has a wide variety of the FTAs and BITs, perhaps to accommodate the counterparties' varying proposals and practices. Japan has negotiated clear definitions of investment treaty provisions in various treaties such as fair and equitable treatments in the Japan-Kenya 2016 BIT, and most favored nation clause in the Japan, the Argentina 2018 the BIT. Sri Lanka's BITs have been observed to provide for the greatest possible protection for foreign investments with minimal policy space to regulate foreign investment. The Thai law contains the limitations on foreign ownership and participation in businesses involving national security, national resources, and infant industries and cultural affairs. The third, ASEAN states also observed to have negotiated a wide variety of exceptions to their investment treaty obligations. These are implemented in domestic foreign investment laws. For example, China has included national security reviews in approvals of foreign direct investments, so-called FDI, the restrictions on trade of the technology for the purpose of maintaining security, protecting human health and security, and rules relating state-owned enterprises. Japan has excluded specific industries such as broadcasting, aerospace, arms and explosive, and electricity, gas, natural energy, and fisheries. Iran's BITs require that all investments are approved by the competent government authority and exclude any foreign ownership of land. Indonesia similarly requires that foreign investments are first approved by the Investment Coordinating Board and places time limits on foreign ownership of shares in Indonesian companies. The participation of ASEAN states in recent large multilateral trade and investment treaties may indicate that these ASEAN states support a general practice and trends. However, at this level, there is currently no observable state practice. Some of the key regional FTAs with the signification of the ASEAN participation include the first, Regional Comprehensive Partnership. For example, the FTA concluded between ASEAN states plus Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, China in 2019, and Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, so-called the CPTPP, an FTA concluded between 12 Asia-Pacific states in 2016. The 5 ASEAN states are signatory to the CPTPP. This CPTPP has been ratified by Japan and Singapore and Vietnam. As this lecture is going to press, Brunei and Malaysia has yet to ratify. The ASEAN state which has signed and ratified the recap of CPTPP are mapped in the table next to this PowerPoint as Annex A. It is evident that while a significant number of ASEAN states have signed or ratified, even more ASEAN states have not yet become parties to these multilateral treaties. Let me touch upon the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This RCEP recap was signed by the 15 state parties on 15 November 2020 and consists of the 10 ASEAN states and their 6 FTA partners, for example, Australia, China, India, Japan, New Zealand, and Korea, though India decides not to join that treaty. However, RCEP departs from the common practice of including ISDS mechanism in the investment chapter. This absence may be due to lack of negotiated consensus. Thus, RCEP mandates the parties to discuss this topic within 2 years after the entry into force of the RCEP. This reservation against inclusion of ISDS is also evident from the removal of the capacity for investors to attempt to access ISDS in other investment agreements through the RCEP MFN clause. However, Article 19 RCEP does provide a for state-to-state dispute settlement mechanism under which investments may request their home state to expose their claims against host states, like in the case of the WTO. However, these provisions generally remain unutilized in the BITS. Moreover, this does not preclude investors from using ISDS provisions from among other BITS and FTAs. Let me touch upon the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Arrangement. This CPTPP investment chapter contains a modernized and improved form of the investment arbitration to access ISDS. While following the traditional ISDS model, the CPTPP ISDS provision have limited scope and provide a tailored arrangement. For instance, the parties agreed to suspend the application of the provisions relating to investment agreements, for example, investor-state contract, and investment authorization, including for the submission of ISDS claims, for example, limiting the submission of claims to the breach of a treaty obligation and narrowing the scope of challenging government measures. Further, several of the CPTPP signatories have signed bilateral opt-out from ISDS. These variations in ISDS were created by bilateral-sized letters that provide for, first, removed or modified ISDS provisions between specific countries, or the second, terminate pre-existing IIAs, which replacing overlapping ISDS commitments. Thank you very much for your very kind attention.